Ladies and gentlemen, please be seated. The program is about to begin. Ladies and gentlemen, please be seated. The program is about to begin. Please welcome to the stage Peraton Senior Vice President of Government and Customer Relations, Mara Motherway.
Is it on now? Giddy up. All right. I don't think I need to say anything about lunch. Everybody's eating. Today I have the distinct honor of introducing our next conversation. I must begin by noting how important and significant this conference is to me, not only to Peraton, who is proud to be the host sponsor today. I spent 20 years on active duty serving in our Navy as an intelligence officer. I came into the Navy in 1988, when, as you can imagine, women's roles were more limited than they are today. The mentors and advocates that I had were mostly men, and they were engaged and committed. Those men, Admirals Jake Jacoby and Jack Dorsett, led from the front and drove change. And in our next session, we will hear from the first woman to lead a major intelligence agency in the history of our country, who led from the front and drove change alongside those flag officers, as well as the first woman to serve as the Director of National Intelligence. She is at the helm today, ensuring we have an intelligence community workforce made up of people who think differently, see problems differently, and overcome challenges differently. These women have broken glass ceilings, but I dare say we still have a way to go, which is why this conference and this forthcoming conversation is so significant and important. But because it isn't about what we do first, it's about what we do next with what we learned first. It is my honor to now turn the stage over to our board chair of INSA, Tish Long.
And Mara, I remember when you were that naval intelligence officer, when she was on the Congressional Affairs staff, on the Navy staff, and helped us tremendously within naval intelligence. So thanks for being here, Mara, and thanks for Peraton and their sponsorship. What a great morning. Yes? I mean, starting with Gina's remarks and her framing of security versus safety, how women approach that, what women bring to the conversation, to our panel talking about neurodiversity and everything that neurodiverse individuals have to offer the community, and how we all maybe need to think about things a little bit differently, inclusion in a different way. To those Ignite rounds, oh my goodness. Each one, I can't say each one was better than the one before, they were all just amazing. And I have to say, I don't know if Patrick is still here, it was really interesting to hear about that contest from the other perspective. I mean, Patrick, I don't know if you know, it was not my idea. And when it first came to me, I thought, I don't know about that idea. A contest? General counsel, and I had the best general counsel, said, you can't do this, you can't do this, you can't do this. And I said, we're going to figure out a way to get there. So really interesting to hear it from the other perspective. And for the audience, we used not only the winning team's ideas, we used ideas from almost every team. And that formed the basis for the strategy at NGA for the next 4 years, which continues today. So how cool is that, Patrick? Well done. Now, it really does give me immense pride to be able to welcome our keynote, the Honorable Avril Haines, the first woman to lead the U.S. intelligence community. How cool is that? Awesome. We often say it's about time. We will have arrived when we're no longer saying the first. But as a community, we have come a long way. We just still have a little work to do. We heard Colonel Frost say, it's not easy being comfortable, being uncomfortable. But that is what is still too far often the case when you are a woman in our community. It's not unusual, still today, to be the only woman in the room, unfortunately. To all of our male colleagues here today, being here truly shows your commitment to making the workforce more equitable. Thank you for being here. And I'll amplify a little bit what Colonel Frost said. I'm not only going to ask the men in the room, another one of my challenges for today, but I'm going to ask everyone in the room. When there's only 1 or 2 women, or 1 or 2 people of color, or 1 or 2 people who are diverse in any way that we describe diversity, which is cognitive diversity, diversity of thought, draw them into the conversation, amplify what they have to say. We really are better as a community when we are including everyone's voice. Okay, you're not here to listen to me. We're all here to listen to the D&I. It is my great pleasure to introduce the Honorable Avril Haines, the 7th Senate-confirmed D&I in our nation's history, and the first woman to lead the U.S. intelligence community. I'm not going to go through her bio. I think that speaks for itself. But what I will say is, when Avril speaks, I think people listen. And I know I'm looking forward to hear what you have to say. So, Avril.
Thank you so much, Tish, for that incredible introduction, and I couldn't agree more, obviously, with your words. And also to the leadership of INSA, Suzanne, and others for hosting this terrific symposium for empowering women and engaging men. And thank you also for your work and support as an institution, really. I know that diversity and inclusion are among the guiding principles for INSA, and I think that really makes a difference, as all of us are part of a community that are trying to achieve these objectives. And you have such a great group of speakers today. I wish I had been here earlier, and the topic of the panel this morning I thought was absolutely terrific, as I think it's utterly crucial, frankly, for us to find non-traditional ways to leverage diverse talent pools in the intelligence community. And to that point, I thought I would mention some of the unique opportunities for women in science and technology in the intelligence community, with the hope that you might spread the word. I know many of you already do, but just to give you a little bit more material. And then I thought I would talk a little bit about how things have changed for women from my perspective, what some of the challenges are that we're still facing today, and what we're trying to do to improve the situation. And I'll try, however, not to go on too long, because I'd really like to hear your thoughts and basically answer the questions that I know Tish is going to be asking me. But first of all, coming back in after being out of government for a few years, I can tell you that I have been so inspired by the remarkable women that I see throughout the community who are leading us into the future. And it is striking to me how many of them have a background in science and technology, which demonstrates to some extent how things have changed, but also how this is perhaps a non-traditional area where we can leverage diversity. And I don't have to look far. Right next door to me in my office is Dr. Stacy Dixon, my principal deputy, who is absolutely extraordinary. Stacy has a doctorate and a master's degree in mechanical engineering, and she began her career in the IC at the NRO and rose through numerous positions at NGA, and of course was the director of IARPA, as many of you know, which is within the ODNI. And she's mapping out the IC's future in technology, and all I can say is that we're in very good hands. And another example is Rachel Walsh for our new National Intelligence Manager for Climate and Global Issues, who has a science degree and recently proposed we establish a climate lab in the IC. Or Kathy Brinsfield, who has an MD and a master's in public health and whose experience across government and the private sector is extensive, ranging from chairing emergency medical services and studies at Boston University to leading health affairs as the Assistant Secretary at DHS and now serves as our advisor on global health security issues. And there's also Tanya Wilkerson, who's here today and who you'll hear from later today. And she is, of course, our current and wonderful Deputy Director of NGA, who holds a bachelor's degree in electrical engineering and a master's in engineering management, and as well as Adele Merritt, who is our IC Chief Information Officer, and she is another extraordinary woman who happens to have a master's and a PhD in mathematics. And I mention these examples, and they really are just a small subset of who's out there leading the intelligence community. But part of what I'm trying to message is first that we need the exceptional talent that women bring to the intelligence community. This is what we need for the intelligence community more generally, and these women have the talent that we need, and many of you have the talent that we need, and that is going to be crucial to our success. But also that there are women who are moving into the top positions across the intelligence community with a wide range of backgrounds and experiences, even as we continue to have challenges, which I'll get to. But their example, I hope, makes the IC all the more appealing to women who might be considering a move, and there are so many options for them. I know there are women who are working in the FBI laboratory division as explosive experts, biologists who are processing DNA, chemists who are identifying unknown materials such as poisons or drugs, women who are computer engineers working on data, or maritime biologists working on Navy intelligence. There are just so many unexpected areas in which talent, knowledge, and experiences of every stripe are needed in our world, and this is especially true as the definition of what constitutes national security continues to expand. And I often think the magic occurs when we combine expertise in different fields, and consequently we need to encourage the wonderful talent that works with us to learn new things, but also to bring in talent who may not have ever thought about the intelligence community, but who should. We have a number of spaces within the IC in which we are encouraging this kind of cross-fertilization, and I think the results are impressive. One example is the North Carolina State's Laboratory of Analytic Sciences, or LAS, which is a research laboratory jointly sponsored by NSA and North Carolina State that develops new analytic tradecraft, techniques, technology to help intelligence officers perform complex integrated analysis. It's really a special place where mathematicians, computer scientists, data scientists, software developers, and analysts from across the intelligence community work in concert with academic and industry partners to engage in translational research that is focused on the development of new analytic technology and analysis tradecraft. And of course, beyond the mission, which is phenomenal, as all of you know, we have to make the case to women and other diverse talent that we are someplace they'll truly have an opportunity to succeed, that we are a place they should want to work. And we've had our challenges, there's no question, and frankly, we still do. But when it comes to diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility, we are working on them, and I believe we will succeed. Over the last 35 years or so, I've seen major changes in the workplace for women that make me realize and give me hope for what it's possible to do to affect change moving forward. I remember going to work in a lab with a calendar hanging over the director's desk that featured naked women. I've been told that at the CIA years ago, you'd find pictures of women in a variety of offices in bathing suits. I remember my first day in physics class when I went to college, having another student lean over to ask me if I was sure I was in the right room, because did I know this was honors physics? Or the time I overheard a professor saying to a colleague that women just didn't have the brains for math. And I remember when I first worked in government as a lawyer, having a more senior female attorney tell me that I should wear a suit every day, even on casual Fridays, because if I didn't, people would assume I was the secretary. And I know all of you have versions of these stories. Things have changed for the better, even if they aren't yet where we want them to be. And I don't have many people questioning my qualifications to be in a room today, but I know it still happens to women in the IC. And I also know that we haven't gotten rid of gender bias, overt or otherwise, but we are making real progress. I wouldn't be here today if that were not true, thanks to so many who have come before me, and that includes many senior men who have supported gender equity in the workplace, many of you here today. The national security community has, for some time, had a reputation that did not value diversity. It was only a single generation ago that many of our IC agencies had an open, stated policy of not hiring anybody who was LGBTQ+, forcing many of our colleagues to hide who they were if they wanted to serve their country. And we have corrected our outdated policies since then and made tremendous strides in recent years. And the policy that barred service for members of the LGBTQ+ community was abolished, glass ceilings were broken, doors opened, ladders climbed. Our progress is encouraging, but the next stage is not going to be easy, and we'll need to focus on diversity of ethnicity, color, race, age, gender, religion, sexual orientation. For these efforts are entirely interlinked, and our success will not be sustainable unless we're working for true diversity across the board. When I was sworn in as DNI about a year and a half ago, my most significant workforce initiative was to put resources and people behind a vision of developing an intelligence community that embodies the full composition of diverse backgrounds and experiences of the American people. And this will take time, and that is true even as we are building on the efforts of so many who have come before us, each of us trying to move the ball down the field a little further. In 2020, before I arrived, all of the then 17 elements of the intelligence community committed themselves to a joint strategy to advance equal opportunity, diversity, and inclusion. And since then, IC leaders across the community have unanimously affirmed that recruiting a talented and diverse workforce is our top priority. We are still not where we need to be, but we are determined to understand the full scope of the problem so that we can actually make progress. And to show you what I mean, let me be upfront about where we are right now. Within the intelligence community, minorities, women, and persons with disabilities are far better represented at the lower GS level ranks than at senior executive levels, suggesting better success at recruiting than retaining and promoting. And even so, when you look at the recruiting, we consistently see a gap between recruiting and hiring minorities. Specifically for the scope of this symposium, although we have made strides towards achieving a more inclusive culture, the composition of women in leadership positions in the intelligence community lags behind women's overall composition in the workforce. According to the most recent data, women comprise 31% of senior positions in the intelligence community. This reflects an 8% deficit from women's overall composition, which has remained at 39% since 2016. Our demographic data has repeatedly identified that women enter the workforce at lower pay grades than men. In 2020, half of our female new hires in the intelligence community entered duty at the GS-10 pay grade or below. For men, only 38% entered duty at the GS-10 pay grade and below. In 2013, One Element's barrier analysis reported that women earn 96 cents for every man's dollar. So what are we doing about these numbers? We have a multi-pronged approach. Strategically, we're focused on addressing gender leadership and pay equity issues by expanding our analytic and corporate focus on gender policy issues. This includes the creation of a new OD&I role, such as the National Intelligence Council's Gender Policy Analyst, and is at the heart of the work that our IC Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Accessibility Office does. I've also encouraged all of our leaders to seek out continuous engagement with our intelligence community affinity networks and employee resource groups. I meet regularly with each of the affinity networks for candid conversations about their experiences and needs from the organization, and this helps me identify issues that they arise. Some of these engagements have fostered new initiatives to expand our recruitment, retention, leadership development efforts by minority, women, persons with differing abilities. And furthermore, we are trying to overcome disparities that we have observed among women intelligence professionals. This calendar year, the ODNI will be looking to enhance the quality of investigations and adjudications by ensuring government-wide consistency through standardized policies, processes, and training. As we modernize the clearance reform effort, for example, enhancements to the national training standards will be key in developing consistent cultural competency training government-wide. And with regard to the hiring process, the personnel vetting community is taking deliberate steps to ensure that their processes are free from bias, allowing us to collect the data that we need and that they don't hinder diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility. We are also committed to periodically reviewing processes, training, triggers, criteria to ensure that they are keeping pace with evolving technology and societal changes. Additionally, and importantly, we are focused on data. As all of you know, data helps make decisions, informs actions. We are working to improve our demographic data collection to ensure we have the most accurate picture of how the intelligence community is doing in achieving its diversity strategic goals and priorities. Since establishing the office earlier this year as a standalone office for diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility, which I should tell you is run by one of the most inspiring women I know, Stephanie LaRue, we have increased our cadre of data scientists and analysts as we modernize our data collection methodology and process. And by leveraging a cloud service, data will be ingested, validated, analyzed, and reported through repeatable, automated processes. And these efforts seek to create a unified set of statistical fields. Previously, IC Elements have conducted barrier analysis on their respective organizations that identified pay equity disparities for minorities, women, persons with disabilities separately. Our expectation is that future data will enable demographic analysis anonymized on the individual level that is more intersectional, which is imperative for understanding and recruiting officers who have overlapping identities, and that will be able to do this across elements. We know we need to move beyond dated binaries and do a better job of exploring intersectionality, where gender meets other identities and demographies. And for example, in 2020, although women represent 39% of the intelligence community workforce, Hispanic women made up only 3% of the workforce. We need better data and information from our officers with overlapping identities to understand how we can change these facts. ODNI is working to address these and other barrier analysis issues by culling Management Directive 715 reports. And if you don't know what those are, you're not alone, but they are an incredibly important mechanism for us getting basically the demographic analysis that we need. This effort will enable interagency barrier analysis, and the findings will be available to all our elements on an online dashboard. And the next stage of this effort will, of course, be critical, for once we get better at revealing the challenges, we will need to actually act on the data that we've unearthed. But I do think we're postured to get there. Lastly, when it comes to attracting and retaining talent, and in our effort to address the new generational expectations of today's workforce, I can assure you that my colleagues both at ODNI and across the community are looking for ways to make our workplaces more flexible and more appealing. We need to do this, and we're committed to providing career advancement and professional growth opportunities to overcome some of the barriers I mentioned earlier. We're also committed to addressing work-life balance challenges in the workplace, particularly for caretakers and for parents. And at places like ODNI, we offer incentives for our younger applicants, like loan repayment programs. We're increasing telework options, something NGA has really taken the lead on. Where appropriate, along with a variety of sponsorship, mentoring, shadowing opportunities across all levels of the workforce. And these are the types of small adjustments that are necessary that can go a long way to meet the preferences of a 21st century workforce while still meeting our mission requirements. In short, the intelligence community has a lot to offer, a broad array of rewarding missions, access to technical resources and networks few can compete with, substantial benefits, and an unparalleled workforce of smart and motivated men and women. But we need more talent, more diversity, and our foreign adversaries study us constantly. They're smart, agile, looking for vulnerabilities. This is why we always need new thinking, new ideas, new people, including smart, brave, and dedicated American women. And progress is being made, and we expect industry, which we increasingly rely on, to be there with us, because this is really a shared mission imperative. In the intelligence community, we know how to work together to support the nation's objectives, and we do so with all of you every day. At ODNI, we hope to bring that same integrative approach to our efforts to increase diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility. And we are resolute in this purpose, and with your help, I hope we will be successful. Thank you, and I look forward to the questions that you have.
Well, how about that? How about another round of applause for the DNI? Avril, you just shared a lot of information with us. No. I mean that in the best of ways. A lot of great initiatives underway across the community, and you actually answered all my questions. Just kidding. For anyone who knows me, knows I've got some questions. Now, I'm going to ask a couple of questions. I know you're on a tight schedule, but we may have time for one or two questions from the audience, so please write them on the cards, and the wonderful interns will collect them and bring them up to me. So let's start with culture.
Yeah.
So we actually talked a little bit about culture this morning. Each intelligence agency has their own unique culture, which is a good thing. Yeah. Stovepipes of excellence, and I mean that in a good way, because each organization within the IC, each agency or entity within a department has a unique mission. Yes, it all has to come together, under the DNI. That said, with those unique cultures, how do you think the community is doing in fostering an equitable and inclusive work environment? And as DNI, what can you do to
improve that?
To improve that.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think, as I indicated, we're not where we need to be. There's a lot of work to be done. And one of the things that is, of course, most challenging and most important is inculcating the right culture, right? That allows people to thrive and allows them to bring the best that they can bring in every circumstance. And I would say there are a couple of things that we're doing, but I just reflect on maybe also some of my own experiences on this. I think that a thing that we're doing and that is part of work that really came out of, honestly, employees who raise these issues through employee resource groups or affinity network discussions is having more discussions about the challenges, right? And really lifting up voices in the workforce that allow people to hear what the challenges are from their perspective and how we can do better, but also getting it done in a way that demonstrates that leadership thinks this is incredibly important. In other words, pay attention. We actually need to think about these things, and we've got to actually create room for this. And we do that through a couple of things. We've had workforce listening sessions, for example, to talk about some of the challenges that Asian Americans have experienced in the context of COVID pandemic and other, the China, obviously top priority for us. How do we talk about China, though, and how does that make them feel, and how do they see that bias creeping into a variety of issues that are unacceptable and reducing their capacity to do their work in a way that's effective. And, so we have empathy training. We have a variety of things that we're trying to introduce into our entry and duty training, into our management training. And each of us, as you say, have different cultures in different parts of the elements, but we're sharing best practices and we're trying to learn from each other where it's working and where it's not. And that has been a big piece of trying to move on the culture. But the part that I'll just also note on this is as follows. Like, I think, for me, it has been a voyage of discovery to try to understand how better to work on these issues in the following way. As a young person in government, I did not want to talk about the fact that I was a woman, in a very male-dominated professional space. I thought it distracted from what I was doing. I thought it would, it was just sort of like, that shouldn't be relevant. Why would I want to discuss this, and so on. And And I certainly developed, as I suspect, many of you developed, kind of different techniques for managing situations that either made me uncomfortable or that didn't seem quite right, or where I felt like my voice wasn't being heard. Whatever those things were, you sort of found ways to deal with them. And what I realized as I sort of progressed in my career is how important, as you start to supervise or as you sort of gain power in your institution and influence because of the work that you're doing, and you're becoming somebody who has experience and knowledge and so on, that you have to change the way in which you approach the issue, that you actually have to, first of all, recognize that your experience is not what everybody else's experience is, that some people have it worse, some people have it better. It's going to be in all kinds of different ways that it will affect you in your space, and that you are going to have to basically pull the string on some of that to understand what's happening, that you need to talk about it, that you need to make space as a manager, and that is, there's sort of the obvious places where you get told, you should be thinking about diversity, for example, and you should talk to the diversity officer, and you should, things like that. But it is true every day of your life if you're doing it right in your work. In other words, it's about setting up a meeting in a way that allows people to contribute more effectively. It's about thinking about the way the office space is. It's about talking to folks, to understand what they're experiencing and how they're reacting to it. It's doing all sorts of things that are so critical to us actually creating that culture, and then also focusing in on and feeling as if it's your responsibility to make sure that we have a diverse institution that reflects the country. And I personally believe that we have an ethical duty to do this, and I think it is fundamental to, frankly, our capacity to be a public institution in a democracy, that we have to have all of these voices in our institution because we all know how much they change the decision making on a day-to-day basis. So it's, critical.
Well said. It is individually, all of our responsibility, as well as collectively. Yeah. And I imagine many women in this room, myself included, can identify with not wanting to put the spotlight on the fact that we're women. Duh. I think you just look at us and we're women. But it took me a long time in my career before I wanted to, really stand up and acknowledge that it was important for me to acknowledge it, that I was a role model. It really was not until I was a fairly senior executive, because I really felt that it took away from the fact that, early in my career, I was an engineer, and, by golly, that stood on itself. I had the credentials. I was a good engineer, and then I was a program manager, and I ran programs, and, we didn't have to talk about, but anyway. I think when the conversation turned, I actually was more comfortable because I was acknowledging who I was. Yeah. So that was another great point that you made within your remarks. So keying off part of your response there, we also talked this morning about mentoring, mentorship and sponsorship, and how important that is, particularly how important it is when it comes to retention and promotion. And, you were just saying we all have that responsibility. So we do, and I think probably everyone in this room is a mentor, is a sponsor, but sometimes there are systemic barriers that prevent us from maybe being as good as we can be, or allowing results to come through. So if I think about, and I went back and looked at this last night, the annual demographic report that your office published just about a year ago now. And so I suspect you're getting ready to publish another one. And while women make up nearly 50% of the workforce at the GS9 level, it's only 34% at the GS15 level, and it's only 31% at the senior levels.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, this is what I talked about, exactly.
Why is this, and what are the concrete steps? You also said that all of the agency directors, signed off on the policy and the steps. Can you tell us what some of the concrete steps are
Yeah.
that are being taken to try and break down those barriers?
Yeah, it is a lot of what I discussed, so I'll be repeating myself a little bit, but it's unquestionable that you end up, as you indicated, and I highlighted the 31% in the senior ranks to show the deficit between the composition, but looking, you can sort of break it down and you just see this trend line that makes it obvious. And so that tells us to some extent it's about promotion and retention, right? And so then you start to dig into the details of what are the barrier analyses, right? And this is where I think the data piece is really important. And as we've been trying to get that out so that we can actually see where are we having challenges, right? So we know also from the annual demographic report, it's public, right, that there is about a 10% gap between applicants and who gets hired when it comes to minorities, right? That is an astonishing gap when you look across the intelligence community. That really tells you something's going wrong there, right? And so as you look at each of these, one of the questions on the point that you've raised is, okay, are we seeing that kind of gap when it comes to promotions, right? Do you see that challenge occurring in those spaces? Well, we've had some barrier analysis that we're trying to get done on these issues, and some of the first ones that we're seeing, really, it's very interesting, like show, for example, and I won't say which elements, but they're sort of going through this different process in different speeds, and we're trying to share, and then hopefully we will eventually have data that allows us to do this across agencies more easily. But basically, there's a difference between, if you just look at promotion figures, right, like so who gets promoted and so on, you might see that the rate is what you would expect statistically. In other words, the number of folks that are applying are roughly equivalent to what you see move forward as between men and women, for example, or other different minorities, just to give an example. And yet you might see that where they're being promoted in the earlier stages actually goes more towards expertise as opposed to management roles, right? Really interesting, so that they're not actually supervising as many people, and you wonder, like, okay, so what's happening there? Is that an unconscious bias? Is there something occurring, right? So this is the kind of work that needs to get done in order to really make a significant difference, in my view, on these kinds of issues. Because, so one is, I mean, I remember studying when I was out of government for a little while, just looking at maternal health figures. And I realize this will seem like a major digression, but I promise it will relate back to it. And it was astonishing how bad, frankly, maternal health statistics are for the United States as compared to a number of other countries. That's a different conversation. But there are also massive racial disparities in maternal health that you see in a variety of states. And one of the really interesting things to me was that when we dug into it at Columbia University, what we were seeing was that the data wasn't getting collected. Like, the data we were working off was so old as compared to so many other issues. And you wonder, like, why is it that the data isn't, like, we have all of this health data that we're collecting in different spaces, but we weren't doing it on maternal health in certain places, right? That's sort of, and the data is critical. The data, we collect data in the intelligence community. We're great at it. This is something we need to do more of. It really helps us to break down these issues. We need to be able to share it, and we need to be able to analyze it so that we can actually figure out.
Get to the plans. And we talked about that this morning. The first, to get to why.
Yeah, exactly.
You have to understand the underlying principles.
And make a compelling case, too. I mean, a lot of people have anecdote, you have a sense of what the problem is, but you also need to have the data to back it up to actually make the change.
Yeah, working off anecdotes is not what we do in the intelligence community. So, all right, turning to questions from the audience. And you talked about security clearance process and reforms there. So with all the focus on reform for the clearance process, what are you doing to also address neurodiversity in the process, since those who are neurodiverse often react and interpret the questions and process differently?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's something that we're looking at. And it's not just security clearance, but it's also vetting across the board. So we work with OPM to do the vetting for the federal government, essentially for certain aspects of the process. And this is something that is being reviewed and redone. And it does get done on a relatively regular basis, but because of continuous vetting, so on, and some of the trusted workforce issues that all of you, I think, know about, we've been going through it. And what we've been doing to address the neurodiversity point, but just more generally, is actually our diversity officer clears on every package that comes to me on vetting and security reform. Right? I want her and her team to be looking at those issues, to think about them, and she has been working with our National Counterintelligence and Security Center on these issues. She's been working in meetings. They've had her come to some of their vetting and security reform meetings so that she can talk to them about some of the issues that she's hearing from her communities on these questions. And it's really been interesting. I think it's been great. It's still we need to see the data, right? We all want to know, is it having an impact? Can we make sure that we're doing this in a way that actually provides, progress? But that's part of the process, so we'll see.
So that's really interesting, putting our tradecraft to work here in this.
Yeah.
Just last question, and recognizing you do have a hard stop. Just continuing on this, do you think the clearance process currently treats neurodiverse people differently?
I don't have enough data to tell you that. I instinctively, I feel as if there are challenges in just understanding and culturally, reacting to things. And we've sort of, we've gotten some anecdotal evidence that indicates that, there's some things that if they'd looked at through a different lens, maybe they would have seen it in a different way. Nothing, though, that has resulted in here's a decision that was made differently as a consequence of that. But, it's just, this is where we need to make sure that we're actually looking at it and understanding it and, acting on it.
Okay. Well, Deanna Haynes, thank you so much. Thank you for spending time with us. You were very gracious with your time. And we very much appreciate all that you are doing in leading the community. So thank you.
Thank you for all that you're doing. Thank you.
Thank you, Tish, for leading the discussion. Thank you, Deanna Haynes, for joining us. I want to give you all a few housekeeping notes. There are restrooms, ladies, on other floors of the building, so there's quite a long line out there. And I also wanted to mention there is some dessert outside as well as beverages out in the reception area, and to please join us at 1:15 where we will reconvene. Thanks so much.